Joining us now from Newsmax Studios in New York is conservative thinker and best-selling author George Marlin. Mr. Marlin served as executive director of the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey under New York Governor George Pataki and was the Conservative Party's candidate in the 1993 race for mayor in New York City. Mr. Marlin is the editor of The Quotable Fulton Sheen and the author of The American Catholic Voter. His most recent book is Narcissist Nation, Reflections of a Blue State Conservative. And Mr. Marlin, thanks so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
Well, Governor Scott Walker won a resounding victory in the recent recall election. Some say it is a bad omen for Mr. Obama's re-election, and the Obama people claim that the president did well in exit polls. Can you give us some insight into your take on that race and also the role the Catholic vote played in that state?
Well, in terms of the Wisconsin race, what you have to keep in mind is 35% of Wisconsin is Catholic. A lot of Germans settled there back in the late 19th century. They were farmers, while Irish Catholics who came in the 19th century generally settled in the inner cities. But having said that, the exit polls, everyone seems to agree, were pretty skewed. But even if they weren't, Mr. Obama has something to worry about here. Two issues. First of all, I believe the economic issues will dominate this election. However, when you look at the Rust Belt states and the Midwestern Catholic states where it's an aging population, they are more populated with practicing Catholics for whom certain social issues matter. Abortion, funding of abortion, gay marriage, this whole issue of religious liberty with the Roman Catholic Church. So in a tightly contested election, which we can expect this to be, in a state where Wisconsin, if 2 or 3% of those voters, Catholics in particular, come out in the numbers they came out most recently in this recall, Mr. Obama could have problems. And in a tight race, that 2 or 3% difference who votes primarily on conservative social issues and conservative Catholic issues, Wisconsin, like many of the states in the Midwest and the Rust Belt, could go for Mr. Romney in November.
Now, polls find that President Obama is losing ground among Catholic voters nationwide, even though the president got 54% of that vote in 2008. A Gallup poll last month had the president tied with Mitt Romney at 46% for the overall vote, but Mitt Romney receiving the support of 62% of very religious Catholics. Could Catholics then be the deciding factor in the defeat of Barack Obama?
Absolutely, and here's why. There are, Mitt Romney got John McCain, Senator McCain 4 years ago got 173 electoral votes. That's 97 shy of the magic number of 150. The key swing states of Florida, Indiana, Ohio, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin in particular, have heavy Catholic populations, heavy Catholic older populations. Those are swing states. Obama carried them all last time. In 2004, Kerry only carried Pennsylvania with 51% of the vote and Michigan with 51% of the vote. So, in addition to the economic woes within those Rust Belt states, you have an older Catholic population. Generically, you have the cafeteria Catholics, the younger Catholics who are more Catholics on Christmas and Easter and don't care about their faith during the year. An older demographic, church-going Catholics, vote along social lines as well. So when it comes to religious liberty, when it comes to same-sex marriage, these Rust Belt Catholics in these key swing states can make the difference and can throw Obama out of office. So I think the church-going, practicing older Catholic will be the key to this election, and I think they're breaking for Romney at the moment.
In a recent article, you wrote that the state to really watch is Pennsylvania. You even suggest that it could go GOP for the first time in 28 years. How critical will Pennsylvanian Catholics be to the 2012 election outcome?
Well, again, it's a typical Rust Belt state. Pennsylvania is 35% Catholic. It's a very interesting state. You have the liberal parts of Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, and then in the middle of the state, which they call the T, because it's sort of shaped like a T, that is rural, Protestant, socially conservative, big gun people, big NRA country. And so they tend to vote along the lines on guns, etc. The other outlying part of the states are very Catholic, older Catholic populations. If you look at the western part of Pennsylvania on the Ohio border, you look at the 10 counties out there, Bush carried all 10 of them in 2004. McCain carried them in 2008, but by a much narrower margin because the voter turnout was down on the average about 10%. So Catholics, older Catholics, didn't like McCain, wouldn't bring themselves to vote for Obama. But if they come out this year, they can decide the election. And remember, Kerry only got 51% of the vote in Pennsylvania. It's a swing state, it can go Republican, and if those Catholics come out again, as they did in '04, same thing in the city of Philadelphia, a very liberal Democratic state. Kerry got 81% of the vote, Obama got 83%, but the voter turnout, believe it or not, was down 10% in '08 versus '04, because South Philly Catholics tend to be Italian. The old Italian quarter of Philadelphia stayed home during that election. So, yes, Pennsylvania is a key state. It went very Republican last year, has a pro-life governor, two pro-life United States senators. It's a state to watch that can decide the election.
Now, the Catholic bloc has historically been considered a presidential election bellwether. However, some have said lately that the bloc is fractured, and others are saying that there is no Catholic bloc because Catholics are now more assimilated into mainstream culture. Do you think that this is the case?
There is some truth to all of that the Catholic voter, the old, let us say, white Catholic voter is more assimilated. We have a new Catholic population that's growing dramatically in the South and Southwest. Hispanics, it's going to be interesting to see how they break over time. George Bush got 41% of their vote in 2004. McCain got about 31% of their vote. It's interesting, Hispanics who start making over $100,000 a year tend now to vote Republican. So it's very much as the Irish and the Italians, as they moved up the economic ladder, they became more economically conservative, and they're naturally socially conservative. But since 1972, Richard Nixon beating George McGovern as a generic Catholic vote, he who carried the majority of the generic Catholic vote won the election. So on a generic basis, it still holds, but I think the key now is looking at pockets of votes, Catholic votes, and looking whether or not they're practicing Catholics, that matters. Catholic vote doesn't matter as much in Ohio, rather in New York or California. It's a larger number, particularly downstate, New York City and LA, where they're more generic cafeteria Catholics. You go to upstate New York, you'll still find in Buffalo older Catholics in the Rust Belt part of that state, but they're not numbers anymore that matter as they did back in the 30s and 40s and 50s when Al Smith ran for governor, or John F. Kennedy ran for governor and ran for president, John F. Kennedy ran for president. So it is a changing dynamic. But the key point is this year in the Rust Belt states, Catholics will still matter.
Now, John Zogby's research shows that 16% of evangelical Christians are undecided, and that a third of those undecided evangelicals will never vote for a Mormon. Do Catholics have the same issues with Romney's Mormonism as evangelicals? And if not, how do they view his faith?
In my judgment, they do not. As someone who grew up in the inner cities of New York City, we Catholics know what it is to be on the receiving end of bigotry. Historically, the bigotry against Catholics goes back to its earliest days. John Jay of New York, who was the first Chief Justice of the United States, was a blatant anti-Catholic. Used to lead the parade on the anti-Pope parade that was in New York City back in the 1790s. So we know what it is to get the back of the hand of bigotry. So when it comes to other Christian sects, I don't think we have as a whole, a serious problem with Mitt Romney's religious background because of our own experience. It appears to me that evangelicals have a bigger problem with Romney's Mormon religion than Catholics do.
Now, President Obama recently came out in support of gay marriage. His HHS mandate that religious organizations provide health insurance that includes birth control for workers has led to allegations of an attack on religion. Can we attribute Obama's loss of Catholic support to these issues, or are there other issues that are just as important to Catholics, like the economy? I think you might have touched on this earlier.
In my judgment, the economy will still be the #1 issue. However, along the edges, there's always going to be in Ohio and Wisconsin, in Pennsylvania, in Indiana, in Michigan, 3 or 4% of the voters, Catholic primarily, who are very much concerned about issues like religious liberty and opposition to same-sex marriage. If they come out in full force in an election that's really a toss of a coin, they could make the difference. It's interesting, for years Democrats have complained about Republicans making social issues the key issues during a campaign, dismissing them as not important. This year, because Obama has very little to run on in terms of economic issues and fiscal issues, he's trying to turn the tables and turn it into a social issue campaign. His tin ear coming out of Hyde Park, Chicago, where he was surrounded by admirers who talked the same language. he doesn't get a sense for what's out there in the outpost of Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, a lot of other states. You remember his comments a few years ago when he said, oh, Pennsylvanians are just angry people who keep their guns and cling to their religion. So he has a tin political ear. I think he's muffed it on a number of things, and it could very well cost him the election.
All right, we'll leave it there. George Marlin, thanks so much for being with us on Newsmax TV today.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you for watching Newsmax TV.